Hello, my name is Noorsyafiqah Binti Mohammad Shafihi, student ID 0360457, and I will be presenting on Abraham's case regarding fixtures and fittings. The sale and purchase of property often involves considerations regarding what is included in the sale. Fixtures and fittings are common areas of dispute in such transactions. In this video presentation, I will examine the relevant law, cases, and considerations, particularly focusing on the definitions of fittings and fixtures, how the law applies to Abraham, the significance of the paintings and the sculpture to the property's value, the intentions of the parties, and the challenges and potential outcomes for Abraham. Firstly, fixtures are items that are attached to the land or property and are considered part of it, where the removal of it would result in damage to the property. Fittings or chattels, on the other hand, are items that are on the land but not part of it. It has been said in Holland and Hodgson, 1872, of the test to determine fixtures and fittings, where Blackburn J. mentions the degree of annexation and the purpose of annexation. According to the degree of annexation test, the more firmly an item is attached to the property, the more likely it is to be considered a fixture. Another test is the purpose of annexation test, which considers the reason an item was brought on to the land. This test evaluates the intended purpose behind the item's placement. If the item was placed for the enjoyment of the item itself, it remains a fitting. In the case of Dibble and Moore, 1970, a greenhouse attached to land only by its own weight was regarded as only a fitting, not a fixture. It wasn't physically attached, and on the second test, there was no objective intention to make the greenhouse part of the land. Another case that can distinguish the difference between fixtures and fittings is the case of Berkeley and Paulette, 1976. Regarding pictures screwed on a wall, statue resting on its own weight, and sundial, the Court of Appeal found that all three items remained fittings as they are removable without significant damage to the property, and the pictures were attached because that is how pictures are enjoyed. To address Abraham's case, it is essential to determine whether the paintings and sculptures should be legally defined as fixtures or fittings. According to the degree of annexation test, items that are firmly attached to the property are likely to be considered fixtures, while those not attached are typically fittings. In Abraham's scenario, the paintings are easily removable, indicating they are likely fittings. However, in accordance with the purpose of annexation test, the paintings were hung for enhancement to the property's Victorian style aesthetic. Similarly, the sculptures, though heavy, rest by their own weight. According to the degree of annexation test, this suggests they are fittings. Moreover, applying the purpose of annexation test, if the sculptures were strategically placed to improve the property's aesthetics as part of its design, they could be classified as fixtures, as established in Dean Court and Gregory, 1866. If something is attached to land or not attached to land, the really important question is whether it is part of the architectural design of the property. The tapestry in this case had become fixtures, and along with this, there were heavy marble statues that rested on their own weight. The degree of annexation test would suggest they are just fittings, but the purpose of annexation test proves that they have become an overall part of the architectural design. Lord Justice Rock in Botham and TSB Bank, 1997, gave guidelines of what is likely to have become a fixture and what is not. The court emphasized in this case that the second test is the most important one to determine whether it is a fixture or a fitting. Whether the purpose of the article brought on to better enjoy as chattels or attached to improve the usage of the home. Although the tapestry in the case of Lay and Taylor, 1902, is deemed as a fitting due to its ability to be removed without any damage, the tapestry's only purpose is for its enjoyment. It can be compared that the painting in Abraham's case can be also removed, however, plays a part in the architectural design of the overall home. Without these decorations, the value of the house would decrease as they play a role to set the tone of the house to be of Victorian style. In conclusion, based on these tests and relevant case law, the painting and sculpture from the Victorian era are likely fixtures. The issue at hand is whether the paintings and sculptures should be considered fixtures based on their enhancement of the property's value and the intentions of the parties involved. According to the law, items that significantly enhance the property's value are often deemed fixtures, indicating an intention for them to be part of the property. In Berkeley and Paulette, 1976, the Court of Appeal found that paintings and a statue and a sundial were fittings because they could be removed without significant damage and their placement was for enjoyment rather than enhancement. This case demonstrates that the purpose behind placing the items is crucial in determining their classification. Similarly, in Elletstone Ltd. And Morris, 1997, the House of Lords ruled that a bungalow was a fixture because its purpose was to enhance the land's use as a residence. This supports the idea that if the paintings and sculptures were intended to enhance the property's value, they could be seen as fixtures. Where items are expressly referred to in the contract, the rules concerning fixtures and fittings are displaced. In Taylor and Hammer, 2002, the court held that a reasonable person who knows what the parties know when the contract was made would take it to mean is critical, unless it is expressly mentioned that the items were going to be removed. In this case, flagstones that were initially present in the garden were removed by the seller before the sale was completed. The court ruled in favor of the buyer, determining that a reasonable person would have expected the flagstones to remain part of the property. In relation to Abraham's case, if the paintings and sculptures were strategically placed to improve the property's aesthetics and overall value, it suggests an intention for them to be fixtures. Abraham's belief in their inclusion and reliance on this expectation impacts his perception of the property's value. Brenda's vague response about their inclusion creates ambiguity, further complicating the matter. If Brenda had intended for these items to enhance the property, they might be classified as fixtures. However, if her intention was merely for personal enjoyment, they would remain fittings. Additionally, since Brenda did not expressly mention that the paintings and sculptures would be removed, a reasonable person might have assumed they were included in the sale, similar to the flagstones in Taylor and Hammer. However, Brenda argued that the high value of the paintings and sculptures did not make sense for them to be included in the sale of the property. This aspect introduces another layer of complexity, as it raises questions about what a reasonable person would have expected under these circumstances. While Brenda's argument about their high value might suggest they were never intended to be part of the sale, her vague responses and the significant role these items played in enhancing the property's value complicate this interpretation. In conclusion, based on the purpose and value enhancement test and the cases mentioned, the paintings and sculptures could be considered as fixtures if they were intended to enhance the property's value. Brenda's ambiguous response and Abraham's reliance on their inclusion play a significant role in determining the classification of these items. Despite Brenda's argument regarding their high value, the reasonable expectation set forth in Taylor and Hammer suggests that these items might have been reasonably assumed to be included in the sale. Abraham faces several challenges in classifying the paintings and sculptures as fixtures. The primary challenge is proving the intention of the parties. The case of Taylor and Hammer 2002 illustrates the difficulty in proving intention, as the court emphasized what a reasonable person, knowing what the parties knew at the time of contracting, would have understood. In Abraham's case, Brenda's vague responses complicate this issue. As they leave room for multiple interpretations of her intentions. Another challenge is demonstrating reliance on Brenda's statements. In Taylor and Hammer, the court ruled in favor of the buyer because the seller's actions were seen as misleading. Similarly, Abraham must prove that he relied on Brenda's ambiguous statements about the inclusion of the paintings and sculptures when deciding to purchase the property. This reliance impacts his perception of the property's value and can influence the court's decision on whether these items should be considered as fixtures. Additionally, the lack of explicit terms in the sale agreement complicates his case. Without clear terms in the contract, it becomes more difficult to argue that the paintings and sculptures were intended to be fixtures. However, as seen in Berkeley and Paulette 1976 and Elletstone Ltd. And Morris 1997, items enhancing the property are often deemed fixtures. Therefore, Abraham can argue that the paintings and sculptures were crucial to the property's value, as it plays an architectural enhancement to the property. Possible outcomes for Abraham vary based on the classification of the items. If the court considers them fittings, Abraham may not have a strong legal claim, as fittings typically remain the seller's property. This outcome aligns with the rulings in Berkeley and Paulette and similar cases where removable items for enjoyment were deemed fittings. Conversely, if the court classifies the items as fixtures, Abraham could argue for their inclusion or seek compensation for the enhanced value they provided to the property, as supported by the principle in Elletstone Ltd. And Morris. In summary, Abraham's case centers on whether the paintings and sculptures are fixtures or fittings. Key cases like Berkeley, Paulette 1976 and Elletstone Ltd. And Morris 1997 guide this determination through the degree and purpose of annexation. Brande's vague responses and the high value of the items complicate matters, but Taylor and Hammer 2002 emphasizes the interpretation of a reasonable person to the situation. To strengthen his case, Abraham should present evidence of intent and reliance. Ultimately, clear documentation is vital, and Abraham may argue for inclusion or compensation by proving the items were intended to enhance the property.